Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this financial wellbeing webinar hosted by Mattioli Woods in proud partnership with Rugby League Cares, the official supporting charity of our game and all of its associated stakeholders. Can I first of all take the opportunity to thank everybody in the webinar this evening, firstly for your time and effort for registering your interest and then also following up with your attendance. It's greatly appreciated by everybody. So we know through extensive research conducted not just in elite sport, but in life in general, that the skills, knowledge and expertise around managing finances that a person possesses or not, in some cases, can have a direct impact on our whole of person well-being, both in a positive and a negative way. So taking this into account, it goes without saying that tonight's offering from Adrian will contain education that you can apply not only now, but throughout your lifetime. Can I also quickly add that there will be a full recording of this webinar available on the Players Portal in the coming days. So without further ado, I'll hand over to our expert this evening, which is Adrian. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. And expert's a big word. I don't know about that, but I shall try my best to educate and entertain on the way through. And congratulations to Steve on making it through the intro without coughing, because I know he's got a terrible cough at the moment. So thank you. Welcome everybody to this evening's session. As you know, we regularly deliver webinars on various different topics and subjects, just overall helping everybody with their financial well-being. And this session this evening is going to be no different. However, with this particular session, instead of talking about the basics of our financial education needs like budgeting, borrowing, saving, investing, those kinds of things, we are going to stretch the parameters with this webinar. Make no apology before we start that we are going to go into some quite technical things. We are recording it, so if you want to watch it back and listen again, you can do. But I think at some point we do need to move on from the basics of learning about money management and budgeting onto actually, looking ahead to our financial futures and pushing the boundaries a little bit. And that's what I hope I do with this session this evening. So over the next 45 minutes or so, I'm going to try not to bore you too much with what a financial advisor would do and how you would sort out your own financial planning. But nevertheless, that's the aim of this session. Now, before I start, I just want to confirm, because the session's been recorded, that the information contained in this presentation is correct and relates to the 2024-25 tax period. Also, really important to this session, particularly this session, I am not giving you financial advice as part of this webinar this evening. I am trying to explain how things work, show you financial products and investment services which you can access any way you choose. Anyone can go on a generic search engine and learn more about anything that I'm talking about this evening. So I'm not advising you in any way. I'm trying to educate you and open your eyes to various possibilities to do with your personal finances. So that's pretty much what this session is all about. Now, as usual, I am not on my own during the webinar this evening. First of all, obviously, we have Steve Hardesty, who's going to sit in the background. We can call on him if we need him, but he's got a bad cough, so we'll leave him in peace. As well as that, I have my colleague, Mark Redmond, with me this evening. Now, Mark is there just to answer your questions. So should you have any comments on anything that I say or any questions that you want to ask, you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen that there is a Q&A section. Just underneath the Q&A is a text box. If you type in there, that message goes straight through to Mark. I want to underline that nobody else on the webinar can see that question. Only Mark can see it. So it is in private, it is in confidence, not broadcast to everybody. It's just between you and Mark, and he will reply back and enter into a conversation with you that way. So please do use that. A couple of other things. If we have any questions right at the end of the webinar, we don't get a chance to respond to them, we will take them away. We have your email addresses and we will email you a response back. Not this evening, but tomorrow when we're back in work and we've had a chance to have a look at answering your question for you. Which brings me on to using your email addresses. We do not use them for any other purposes other than these Rugby League Cares webinars. After the webinars are finished, we destroy them, delete them. We don't sell them on to third parties. We don't use them for marketing purposes. So again, you should be sure that we're not going to misuse the information that we have. And lastly, Mark and Steve have got nothing else to do during the next 45 minutes other than look at your questions and answers. So please do pop them in there and at least keep them occupied while I'm doing all the hard grafting of talking to you this evening. So I think it's important when we're thinking about our finances, and if we put ourselves in the shoes of a financial advisor looking at our finances, what would they make of us? What would they think of the financial situation that we're in? And what kind of recommendations would they make for the things that we should do with our finances? Well, any financial advisor worth their money would sit down and consider their clients' short-term, medium-term, and long-term financial planning. We need to make sure we've got all the money that we need to do all the short-term things, because we can't change the things we're going to do in the short term. They're all the things like holidays, birthdays, Christmas periods, all those kinds of things. We have to pay for those. So we need to make sure we've always got enough money to cover those things. When we look to the medium term, they're the larger things that we want to do. It might be transitioning from playing rugby league into having another career. That could be a medium term financial objective of trying to get as much money as we can from our second job as we did with our first job. It might be moving house and getting a bigger home. It might be buying a new car. All those things we can kind of, I think, move backwards or forwards depending on our financial circumstances. And of course, our long term financial planning is all to do with having enough money to look after ourselves when we do come to going part-time or fully retired. There have been a lot of pieces of legislation, politics, economic information which has changed in recent times that has affected all of those three areas of our financial planning: short-term, medium-term, and long-term financial planning. So I thought it would be remiss of me. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these, but it would be remiss of me not to just mention a few of these things on the way through this webinar. So to start off with, I think it's really important that I mention that it doesn't matter who you are or how much money you earn. Everybody without fail has been affected by excuse me, the cost of living that we've seen recently. Now, I'm not going to go through these figures, but what I am going to do for you is paint a picture that things are steadily improving. The very high energy costs that we had to cope with are just starting to rein themselves back in, because you can see we were 2,500, then we've come down to 1,900 and something for the average household, now 1,600 and something for the average household. Now, they're not back to the levels that they were pre-war in Eastern Europe, but they are nevertheless coming in the right direction. Fuel has remained fairly stable in recent times. As you can see, a year ago it was in the 140s, and now a year later it's still in the 140s. Now, it has been rising slightly recently, but again, we are hopefully in a period of stability as far as fuel prices go, although there is some uncertainty in the Middle East, which obviously affects the economic price of oil and gas. And food was running away at a ridiculous rate a year ago. We now see that reining back in. So there is some positive news as far as planning our short-term financial plans, because we have some more stability in our monthly, weekly, whatever your budget is. And those things are stabilizing, so we can be more certain about how much money we have left over after we've done all the things that we have to do with our money: the food, the clothing, the heating, the lighting, etc. And again, just to underline things that have changed in recent times, we have had a significant change in the two recent budgets in the United Kingdom as far as pensions go. Now, whenever we think about our long-term financial planning, it should always include pensions. The reasons for this are clear. You get tax relief on the money that is going into your pension scheme. That makes it very attractive. Also, your employer will also pay into that pension scheme as well, with some matching contributions. And I don't know any investment or any account anywhere where you can match those two positive items on pensions. So just very briefly to bring you up to date on the changes in the legislation, we have had what's called our annual allowance lifted. Now, the annual allowance is how much you're allowed to pay into pensions in any one particular tax year. Everybody did have an allowance of £40,000 a year. In the 24-25 tax year, which we're in right now, that's been increased to £60,000 per tax year. So there's an easing of that restriction on how much money we can commit into pensions. And remember, just to underline, tax relief on the way in. Even if you decide to commit a lump sum of money into a pension scheme, you claim tax relief back on that lump sum through completing a tax return and getting that money back from the Inland Revenue. I'm not going to mention the money purchase annual allowance because it's a bit complicated, but what it does is mean that if you're in receipt of taxable income from pensions, your new annual allowance isn't 60,000, it's 10,000, and that is to stop you from taking money out of pension schemes that you enjoyed tax relief on and paying them into another pension scheme and claiming additional tax relief on them. That's all that rule is there for. But I do want to also mention the lifetime allowance, which is a significant change to pensions legislation. Previously, we had an upper limit which was £1,073,100. Don't worry, not many of us got up that high. But if you did get up that high and you went over that value as a maximum amount of money in pensions, it was quite punitive because they were charging 55% tax on money over and above that. That has now been lifted. So again, there's a real attraction to pensions here because they've increased the amount of money that you can put in and they've removed any upper limit that might have given you a big tax burden as a result of going up that high. So as far as what's changed to our long-term financial planning, well, pensions have become slightly more attractive than they were before. And staying on the theme of pensions and legislative changes, again, we have seen significant changes in how we can access our money in pensions. Now, remember, if you're saving into a pension scheme, it's just like a normal savings account. You've just got lots of tax incentives to be in it. And you can't get hold of the money in pensions until you reach the age of 55, which is soon to become aged 57 in the year 2028. But when you do get to age 55 or 57, you have complete and utter freedom as to how you get that money back from your pension savings. Now, the traditional route of using your money to create income was to buy an annuity. They aren't very popular these days. They are more popular later on in people's retirement, but an annuity is based on how long an insurance company thinks you're going to live for. And then they'll offer you an amount of money. If you hand over your pension savings, they'll offer you a regular amount of money for the rest of your life, which comes out of that money that you've given to them. I think there's a lot of people who are choosing to work longer during their working lives. And so there's a deferment built into taking pension money. Essentially, if you don't need it, leave it where it is and come back to it when you do need it, when the time is right for you to decide to go into semi-retirement and then probably into full retirement. We can, of course, now with our pensions, draw down what we want when we want from our pension pot. So we literally can treat it like a savings account and have what we want when we like by contacting the pension provider and saying, I'd like to have this amount of money out of my pension. And they'll arrange for it to be transferred. So instead of purchasing annuity to give you income for the rest of your life, you could simply draw down what you want when you want and manage it yourself. But there is a pressure with that, in that when it's gone, it's gone. So nobody's going to replenish that pot for you. So it's up to you to manage it yourself as best as possible. And lastly, if you're one of those people that says pensions are not for me, well, you can just have the whole lot paid back to you as a lump sum of money. But just to note that it would be treated as income that's been earned if it's after your tax-free cash on pensions. So 75% of your pension pot goes towards income for income tax purposes. And if you took a really big lump sum of money out of that, it would create a really big tax bill for doing so, because you'd pay tax at 20% possibly at 40%. If it was a really big amount of money, possibly also at 45%. We'll come back and look at tax a little bit later on because it's very pertinent to how we shape our financial planning. And I'll try my best to not make it complicated and keep it as simple as possible. Just another thing in the background, which you should consider as part of your long-term financial planning, is the state pension, which we all get access to if we've been paying tax and national insurance contributions, which all of us do throughout our working lives. Now, if you've done 35 years worth of qualifying national insurance contributions, which most of us may well get to, the state pension has recently risen by quite a large amount because it's linked to inflation and the cost of living. So the jump that it increased by in this tax year was quite significant. And so I want to remind you that we are entitled to receive the state pension. So long as we've done more than 10 years worth of national insurance contributions, we start to earn credits towards receiving the state pension. And as I said before, if you do 35 years of work and paying your national insurance, you would at the moment get £221.20 a week. Now, two things with this. Number one, you're looking at that thinking that's not enough to live on. And you're quite right, it isn't enough to lead a comfortable retirement, Tom. But I do want to point out that this is worth quite a lot of money to a lot of people. Now, if you multiply up £221.20 by the 52 weeks of the year, you're going to get to a figure that's £11,502, 11 and a half grand essentially. That is a lot of money. Most of us, and I appreciate not all of us, but most of us will be living with a partner or a spouse, and they will also be entitled to receive the state pension. So if two people in a household are receiving the state pension after 35 qualifying years, we're talking now about a household income of just over £23,000 a year. So it's not to be overlooked as part of our long-term financial planning. It's the bedrock on which we build our savings and our investments in pensions and other types of investments over and above that. That's what we base our income on when we come through to retire. Another thing which is really pertinent to looking at our short-term and medium-term financial planning is what's happening in our economy at the moment. Now, I'm sure you've all read the news and seen the headlines about high interest rates that we have at the moment. If I could just draw your attention to the chart that you can see on the screen, we have lived through an economic period of stability over the last 10 years or so, where we haven't had to deal with high interest rates. And we've got very used to our mortgage rates being very low, our car finance or, contract purchases on vehicles being fairly low, and things like, short-term borrowing on credit cards and things like that being offered at 0%. We are now in a period where that interest rate is very high compared to what it has been historically. We're at a rate of 5.25%. Now, the reason why this is important is because that rate of 5.25% is a benchmark for all of the financial institutions in the UK. If you want to borrow money, you will be borrowing above that rate for the privilege of borrowing that money. If you're saving, you want to be at or around that interest rate for the money that you're holding in the bank. So the reason why this is important is two reasons: borrowing and saving. First of all, with your savings, you are now attracting a high rate of interest on money that you put in the bank and that you save and put aside. Why am I interested in this? Well, first of all, we're rewarded for saving for the first time in a long time. It's brilliant news, but it comes with just a slight health warning. Everyone in the UK has something called a savings interest allowance. The size of your allowance depends on what rate of tax you pay. If you're a 20% taxpayer, you're allowed to earn £1,000 in interest, but over and above that, you pay tax on the interest that you're earning. If you're a 40% tax rate payer, you only have £500 of interest that you're allowed to earn before the revenue and customs start taxing you on the interest that you earn over and above that figure. Now, if you're a higher rate taxpayer at 40%, let's just think about this logically. If you've got £10,000 in a savings account and you're earning 5% interest, that's £500 interest. You have used up your savings interest allowance. And so, for that reason, I think it's really important you consider putting your savings somewhere where it's tax free and avoids that savings interest tax. So that's why we use ISAs for cash savings at the moment, to protect it away from savings interest tax. And can I just say, by the way, savings interest tax is a tax on money that you were already taxed on in the first place. So it's double taxation. So we really want to avoid that. Very quickly, as far as borrowing goes, um, most of you on the webinar will probably have a mortgage. You'll have probably set that up 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, maybe even longer, but you'll be probably, and I say this just generally, on a fixed rate deal from a few years ago when, if you look at that chart, rates were very low. And when that mortgage comes up for renewal, those rates are going to be really high, and I'm really sorry about that. Just to give you a quick example, if you had a £130,000 mortgage and it was at 2.5%, then you would be paying about £585 a month. If we add just 1% onto the rate, so knock that 2.5 up to 3.5, your monthly repayment goes up to £685 a month. So it's gone up by £100 for 1% on a £130,000 mortgage. Now, if you think of your own circumstances, if you're going to be renegotiating a mortgage in the near future, this is really important that you start the process 6 months in advance of when that mortgage is going to need to be renewed or put onto a new deal. Why 6 months in advance? Well, because mortgage offers last for 6 months. So you get yourself a mortgage offer. If interest rates happen to go up, well, you know, you got the best rate possible. If interest rates start to go down, you get rid of that offer and you move on to a new offer, a lower rate, right up to the point where you want to go on to a new fixed rate or a new deal for that mortgage. I don't have time to go into it in any more detail. We have covered this in quite a bit of detail in one of our earlier webinars a couple of weeks ago to do with borrowing and debt. So if you go onto the player portal, you can find out an awful lot more about mortgages. But I'm just reminding you, this is something that's in the vast majority of people's financial planning over the coming months and years. And again, we're looking at this webinar as if we were a financial advisor looking in on our own finances and asking the questions about what are we doing about this? How does this affect you? Where are you heading towards with your finances? Interest rates, as you can see there, a big driver on how our finances are going to look. So to bring this all together, if you were a financial advisor, you would be starting to think about the medium term to long term financial planning of yourself that you were speaking to. And remember the things that we've had a look at so far. We've had a look at the state pension, which is the bedrock on which you're going to build income later in life. We've got our, I say, workplace pension schemes, our club pension schemes, or our private pension arrangements. And that is to top up over and above the state pension to make sure that we are putting enough money away to look after ourselves later in life. I'll come on and look at that in a little while about future financial planning. There are lots of other things that you could do. And we're going to touch on some of them again later on in more of a financial planning perspective, from a financial planning perspective. But it could be something as simple as living in a big family home. And when you come to retire, you want to downsize and get a smaller house and release equity. Equity could form a part of your future financial planning. Perhaps parents may be wealthy and money from a will or an estate may be part of your future financial planning. There are literally loads and loads of different things that you could do to think about planning for the future. We're just trying to bring them all together and give you some ideas. Just as far as the medium term to long term financial planning goes, there is one particular topic which is really, really popular with rugby players for some reason. Now, this is the same in rugby union, it's the same in rugby league, it's the same in other professional sports as well, like professional cricket. You seem to love second properties, rental income, second, third, fourth, fifth properties, and buying those for investment purposes. So it would be remiss of me not to mention these on the way through if we're thinking about setting out a financial plan and meeting our long-term financial goals. Just to cover off this topic of residential buy-to-let investments, there are, I think, a number of positives in considering this as part of your medium to long-term financial planning. Just to start off with, though, if we're going to consider it, we need to make sure that we've got a deposit for a buy-to-let property, and we're going to need 25% of the value of the property that we're buying as a deposit. Plus, we're going to need some additional money for legal fees and searches and transaction charges and things like that. But if we have got this sum of money and we are interested in buying a buy to let or second property, there's really good news in the marketplace at the moment, because there are a lot of second property lenders out there, which is good for you because you've got lots of companies to negotiate with to try to get the best rate possible to maximize the profits that you're going to get from it. So you can negotiate rates if you have that 25% deposit. It really allows us to shop around for a provider for the mortgage on that property. And we've seen really good gains in property values over recent years. So it means that you have an appreciating asset which you can rely on as part of your medium to long-term financial planning. You could release it, sell that property and have the profits paid back to you. And I think if you consider rugby in particular, having a rental income property is an additional safety net to the bridge between finishing your playing career and starting the second chapter in your life in a new career, in a new work environment. I think rental income could help bridge the gap there, and it's a good part of your financial planning in that respect. It would, though, be remiss of me not to mention some of the drawbacks to do with this. You have to consider the positives and the negatives side by side. You are going to need to have an emergency fund for that property. So maybe the first year's worth of income might need to be set to one side, because you might have a difficult tenant that goes in there. They might start not paying their rent and they might be difficult to get out, and they're quite likely to trash the place before they do leave as well. So you might have to completely redevelop that property to make it ready for another tenant to go in afterwards. We do have to also consider the fact that a property is what we call an illiquid asset. It's not liquid, it's not quick. If you decide that you're going to sell that property and release the equity that you've gained from it and sell it, it's going to take 4 to 6 months to do that, because you may well have a tenant. You need to inform them that you're either selling it with them in it or getting them out. You've then got the legal process, the sales process. All of that added together means that it's not a quick deal to get rid of a property. It can take between 4 and 6 months. So you can't dispose of it very quickly. So lots of pros and cons, but as I said at the beginning of this section, very popular with sports people, and I really do think it can be very useful in that transition from sport into a career. It gives you a financial legacy when your playing legacy comes to an end. So having looked at all that, we've looked at economic circumstances, we've looked at what period we're living in right now, and hopefully, oh gosh, my phone's making some noise. Let me get rid of that. I do apologize. There's an alarm set on my phone that's gone off. So having looked through all of that, I think we need to look towards our very long-term financial planning. If we were a financial advisor, we'd want to make some recommendations on things that we could do that would improve our financial situation as we look towards planning for our long-term future. Now, can I apologize in advance for taking all of your lives and just reducing them down to one little red line on a chart? But if we're looking ahead to retirement, this is essentially what we want from our retirement. We want loads of money in the early years of our retirement because we want to travel the world and go and do lots of things. And as we get older, we are going to need less money because in the early years, we might want to fly to Australia for the holiday of a lifetime and go and watch some matches. But later in our retirement, it's going to be pretty tough to get to the bottom of the garden and back. There is, of course, then a little uptick in the amount of money that we need in our retirement towards the end. And that's factoring in things like the cost of care towards the end of our life. And then set against that is the traditional way in which pensions work. And that is that we have a little bit of income coming in, and then we have the state pension, which adds on to it. And we end up with a kind of an increasing amount of money in our retirement. And so, I wanted to let you know that there are financial planning ways of restructuring our money to try and have more in the early years, less in the latter years, and have an amount of money set aside to look after us for the cost of care. And if you're all now going to take on the mantle of financial planning, you should be aware that financial planning would be really easy if we knew exactly how long we were going to live for. Sadly, we don't know how long we're going to live for. All I can offer you are some stats and information. You can see the Office of National Statistics there. Frighteningly, 1 in 4 people in employment currently will live into their 90s. Interestingly, buried within these statistics from the Office of National Statistics is just a little trend that shows that men who are married live longer and women who are divorced live longer. So, if you're a man, keep hold of the lady. If you're a lady, get rid of them, because it appears that it has to do with your longevity. But again, we need, I just want to remind you, we are going to live on average into our 80s. 1 in 4 people who are working right now will live into their 90s. So we could be leading up to nearly a third of our life in semi-retirement or retirement later in life. So it is really important that we do plan ahead. I mentioned something earlier about tax. Now, tax in the UK drives investments. Tax in the UK drives the financial decisions that you're going to take with your money and how you plan for it. Now, things like buy-to-let properties have recently had tax advantages taken away from them. We also live in a period where these taxation rates haven't moved for a few years now. So essentially, as our income is rising, unfortunately, more and more of our money is falling into these tax brackets that you can see on screen. In case you didn't know how this works, your first £12,570 is not taxed by the government. But then everything between that mark and up to just over £50,000, you pay 20% tax on all that income that comes in. You then, over and above £50,270, start to pay 40% tax on everything you bring in up to £100,000. Then there is a little tax trap that's been set by His Majesty's Revenue and Customs, which sits between 100 and 125-ish thousand pounds. And that is that for every £2 of earnings that you have between those limits there, you lose £1 of that personal allowance at the top there. So that £12,570 ebbs away on your earnings between 125 and 150,000, sorry, 100, 125,000. So you can see there, I've expressed that as a 60% tax rate, which is essentially what it is. And then over and above 125, you're back to 40%. If you earn over £150,000 a year, you enter into the super high tax bracket, which is 45% tax. Don't forget, we also have national insurance on top of that as well. So we do end up paying quite a lot of tax. And for that reason, when we're doing our financial planning, we are looking for things that give us tax efficiency or give us some reason to invest in them so that we can create investments which we can call on again later in our lives, but which do so in an efficient way. I'm going to use this triangle to, over the next few slides, to build up a financial plan. This is exactly what a financial advisor would do with somebody who has a reasonable income, has money to spare, which they could build investments with. And this is exactly how we would approach it. So as you can see here in this triangle, we've got lots of interesting things, which I'm going to tell you about, and you'll have a basic understanding of, I hope, when we finish the webinar. We've covered pensions already. Again, I can't stress enough, they are the most tax efficient way for somebody to build an income for later in life, because you get tax relief on the money when it's going in. 25% of the money is tax free when you want it back. The rest goes towards income tax. But throughout our working lives, we will also have employers who will pay into that pension as well as ourselves paying in. Can't mirror that in any other financial product or service anywhere. Pensions remain the number one thing to use. Over and above that, I've already told you about ISAs and recommended them to you because of their tax efficiency. Now, money going into an ISA isn't tax efficient because it's already been through your PAYE system, if you like. But once it's in the ISA and coming out, it's a completely tax-free source of income, if you like. Great place to hold cash, great place to hold investments. Building up above that, we've got things like what we call in the financial services industry collectives. They're investments, they're stocks and shares, things that you can hold in your own name. You can then dispose of them if you want to and use your capital gains tax allowance, which everybody has each year. The only problem with the capital gains tax allowance is that it's been reducing and in recent budgets and over recent years. So the amount that we can use has been reducing. But can I just remind you, a capital gain is the difference between what you buy something for and what you sell something for. And it's just that bit of profit. It's nothing to do with the original cost that you bought something for. It's just the pure profit that you make over and above, and you have an allowance that you can see there on screen. Building up from that, we can create investment bonds, which can give you in retirement a regular income back on a tax deferred basis. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then perhaps the cherry on top of the icing on top of the cake might be things that are quite complicated, but I will explain them to you, like venture capital trusts and enterprise incentive schemes. Again, from an educational point of view, we are going to have a look at those. Now, I'm not going to cover pensions, but I'm going to go up the layers of that pyramid and run through each one of those in turn. But I'm not going to cover pensions because I've already spoken quite a bit about them. So you should have a fair idea how pensions are working by now. And again, something which we're going to come back to and talk about in our late summer webinar, moving into autumn, is saving and investing. And again, those webinars are going to be loaded up to the player portal. I'm not going to say too much on ISAs because I want to say quite a lot later in the year about them when we do a dedicated webinar on them. Again, I'll get rid of that annoying alarm that's gone off. ISAs, annual allowance, £20,000. The most common types are cash ISAs, stocks and shares ISAs. You can have all of that within one ISA, but you can't go over that £20,000 limit. The investments that you have within ISAs are protected by the Financial Services Compensation Scheme. So you should be safe in the knowledge that if anything happens to your financial institution with an ISA, it's protected by a government insurance policy, if you like, sitting behind it. The attraction here is that everything, once you've put it in, is in a tax-free environment. So there's no savings interest allowance problems for the cash that you're holding in there. There's no capital gains tax issues with the investments that you're holding in there. They're all in that tax-free bubble. So therefore, you can rely on the fact that once it's in there, it's protected away from the tax man. I think everybody knows how ISAs work, so I just wanted to move on to something called collectives. And as I explained earlier, once you've utilized your pensions, once you've utilized your ISAs, once you've looked at things like owning a second or third property for rental incomes, then owning investments directly in your own name, it makes sense to do so. because one very underutilized tax allowance is capital gains tax. So by holding investments personally, you've got the opportunity to make withdrawals or sell the assets if you like. And not if you don't go over £3,000 in this current tax year, there's no taxation issues with disposing of some of those assets. Now we can create portfolios with different levels of risk depending on what your attitude to risk is, depending on how long you want that investment to sit there for. We can also create investments that are towards capital growth or providing you with an income from them, or perhaps a combination of both. It starts to get complicated, but if we draw it right back down to the basics, you yourself might just pick a portfolio of stocks and shares that you're interested in owning and keep them and hold them in your own brokerage account in your own name. And of course, when we come to needing income later on in life, we could then start to sell some of those assets, stay below the capital gains tax allowance, and that would give us a tax-free source of income, which the taxman isn't going to ask for anything back. So again, just go out and create your own investment portfolios, your own investments, and hold them in your own name. Now, building on top of that, we're starting to enter the area of created financial products which give you tax advantages, but are also geared towards your very long-term financial planning. I appreciate the people on here being rugby players. You are looking at putting investments away for a very long period of time. But we do have things in the UK called single premium bonds, which I wanted to introduce you to. It's something a financial advisor would consider, so therefore we'll learn a little bit about them. Now, before I start, these can be held onshore, excuse me, or offshore. When I mention the words offshore, you dream about tropical islands and palm trees and, hiding things away from the taxman. Quite the contrary. Offshore, in our case here, with tax planning, means the Isle of Man or Dublin. So no palm trees, no golden shores, or anything like that. It's similar to owning stocks and shares that I discussed on the previous slide, but what we're looking at here is investing a lump sum of money. So if throughout your life you're the beneficiary of a lump sum of money, then we can create a single premium bond and it can be invested for growth over a relatively long period of time. Again, set to your risk profile. So whether you're a high risk person because there's a lot of time for it to grow, or medium risk because you're quite conservative, we can set up a single premium bond with a lump sum of money. Why would you want to consider doing that? Well, the main benefits are that when you come to retire or retire early, you've got the ability to draw 5% of the original lump sum that was invested whenever you start to draw it down for a period of up to 20 years. And that's on a tax deferred basis. So any withdrawals from that investment attract no tax whatsoever. It's deferred off to when the bond is finished or empty or all the money's been withdrawn out of it. And then it can be within your estate. So that can be pushed on to your final estate value, if you like. Now, equally, up to 2% of the initial investment can be withdrawn on a tax deferred basis for up to 50 years. So, again, if you were the recipient of a large lump sum of money, we set up a single premium bond within the financial landscapes that we're working to at the moment. You can withdraw amounts of money out of it and defer any tax away from it. And again, if it was an offshore single premium bond, Isle of Man or Dublin, then if there were large lump sums of money left within that single premium bond, that would be outside of your estate for inheritance tax purposes. So that would be the reason why it might be held offshore as opposed to being onshore if you've got no inheritance tax issues whatsoever. Again, we're starting to get complicated with these products, but I hope I'm making it easy enough to see how they work. Now, something that you might not have heard of, but I am in the realms of higher risk investments here, but something that you might not have heard of are things called venture capital trusts. They are collected investments in smaller growing businesses. And because it's an investment in a portfolio of smaller growing businesses, this is why I'm saying that they are higher risk, because obviously small businesses have the potential to not make great returns or close down, much more so than larger businesses do. But nevertheless, the government are really keen on us considering venture capital trusts as an investment as part of our investment portfolios. They incentivize that by allowing you to take off some of your income tax that you pay during the year if you make an investment in a venture capital trust. Now, the maximum amount you can invest in a venture capital trust is £200,000. We at Mattioli Woods would not recommend investing £200,000 in venture capital trusts. We're more of the opinion that this is a little and often approach to investing, because they start from as little as £5,000 for an investment into a venture capital trust. Again, you might be thinking, well, what's the plus point here in investing in high risk small businesses? The attraction is that 30% of the amount you invest can be taken off your income tax bill in that same tax year. So if we invested £20,000 in a venture capital trust, we could reduce our income tax bill by £6,000. So we've reduced our tax bill and we have an investment which we hope can grow as a result of that tax saving, if you like. Just one really important point, that if that was the case and we were investing 20,000, we're saving 6,000 off our income tax bill, which we do on our tax return. You do have to have paid at least £6,000 in income tax in order to save it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be worthwhile doing it. And again, I just underline the point, these do start from £5,000, so from a very low level. And we could perhaps do little and often. So one a year for the next 5 years. Venture capital trusts tend to last for a 5-year term. So at the end of that 5 years, we can either cash them in and have the money back with profits, we hope, or we can roll them over and have the same tax deduction again in 5 years' time, but not have to invest a capital of £5,000 by rolling it over. So as you can see, we can start to build a 5-year rolling venture capital trust investment, which continually takes money off our tax bill every year, year on year, on an ongoing, on-rolling basis. There are restrictions on accessing these investments, by the way. They do have to run for the full 5-year term. Otherwise, there are penalties for accessing them early. But let me move on to another type of investment, which is very, very similar to what I've just told you about on venture capital investments. There's another type of investment with a bigger upper limit, but a same lower limit that offers the same attraction to invest into. And those are enterprise incentive schemes. But again, can I underline that these are higher risk investments, maybe slightly higher again than venture capital trusts, because they are really investing in quite small startup businesses, and also investing in industry sectors like renewable energies and things like that, also sector specific investments. But again, we get a 30% income tax deduction on these investments. They tend to last for a 5-year period. The medium to long-term investments, early redemption is just not possible with these. And it is important that if you are thinking of investing in venture capital trusts and enterprise incentive schemes, that you do still have cash assets that you can rely on yourself, because you can't rely on cashing these in if you have a major financial problem and you need money quickly. You know, there are massive penalties to trying to get out of them. You're going to get back a lot less than you originally invested. However, definitely something to think about. Not complicated in any way. It's probably the first time you've ever heard of them, but if you use Google or you go online, you can find out all about how these work, and you can start to see some of them that are brought directly to the market, and you can apply for them directly yourself. Just something to consider alongside all the other things that I have thrown at you during this webinar, which is quite a lot. So let's bring this kind of second part of the session to a close with me giving you an unrealistically brilliant forecast for the future. I do want to underline the point that I am being quite liberal with these figures and explaining how they work. But I'm hoping that if I run through this with you, some of those concepts will embed in your mind. You go, actually, he's right. We could do additional things which could, help us later in life to build our long-term financial planning. Let me just run you through this quickly. Here we can see a healthy pension pot, first of all. It's £300,000. Of course, we can take 25% as tax-free cash, but let's say we're drawing 5% from that pot every year, and we hope that it would remain invested and carry on growing while we're taking 5% a year out. But that means that we're taking out £15,000 a year income. Remember, we have a personal allowance of £12,570. So can I tell you, you'd have a tiny tax bill of £486 to pay that year from drawing £15,000 out of your pension. If we'd invested in a single premium bond, a selection of venture capital trusts, if we'd saved using our ISA allowance, then thinking about withdrawing 5% from each of these investments that have built up over the years, we could match the income that we've taken from our pension pot. So we could double it from 15 to £30,000 worth of income, and the tax bill would still be £486 to have £30,000 of income, because we've been really clever in advance at creating pots that we can draw money from when we're living in retirement, but doesn't give us an additional tax bill over and above this. Hopefully this point brings it home to you that with a little bit of foresight and a little bit of financial planning, that we could create quite a lucrative scenario for ourselves when we're trying to draw money later in life as a result of our playing career and as a result of our second or potentially third careers that we go through throughout our working lives. So thank you for bearing with me on this webinar. This is one of the more challenging webinars that we've ever done as far as the content, the information, and hopefully following me and my explanations as to how these things work. Can I remind you what I said at the beginning? And that was, we all have to take responsibility for our short-term, medium-term, and long-term financial planning. If we put ourselves in the position of being a financial advisor and looking at ourselves, we would ask the question, have we got enough money to do those things in the short term? Great, no problem. We're reaching a point where our economy is stabilizing and we've had some positive news as a result of recent budgets. So secondly, what are we doing towards the medium term? Are we looking at things that are going to help us with our transition from our sport into our second career, or maybe even help us in the transition from our second to third careers that we might enjoy throughout our lives? And then in our long-term financial planning, are we maximizing the tax efficiency with the products and the investments that we're planning to make, so that when we're looking at retirement from the other side of the coin, we're actually living in retirement, are we able to draw on these to help us create an income in a really tax efficient manner? That's what we were trying to achieve with the webinar. Hopefully I've not bamboozled you all, and hopefully I've managed to actually explain a few things and you piqued your interest in some products and services. Not from Mattioli Woods, I'm not selling anything whatsoever, just trying to tell you what's out there and the planning tools that can be used. My colleague Mark has been quietly sitting there listening to me droning on about a presentation which he's already seen half a dozen times in the past. So Mark, how's it been going in the background? Any questions come up?
The answer is yes. The have.
Okay.
Thank you for them. All right. Some really good questions about pensions. Like, yeah, can you consolidate pensions? Amount you can put into pension. In other words, can you pay more than the standard amount, and can you still get tax relief? Which is always a cracking idea if you're happy to park it away for the future. And another a couple of questions around ISAs, one of which, to be fair, I think is interesting perhaps for everybody, either live now or perhaps picking it up in the recording, and it's this. ISAs, I know you're going to come up with as a topic, but the lifetime ISA, or sometimes referred to as the LISA or whatever, is that a great way of saving for the future if you've already bought your first home?
Yes and no. Now,
Right.
I couldn't possibly give you any financial advice and tell you this is the best thing to do, but so yes, from the point of view that any money that goes into a lifetime ISA attracts a government-backed
Yeah.
bonus on that money of 25% of the amount you put in. You did hear me right. That's 25% on top of the money that you pay in, but it's very heavily restricted on how much you can put in, which is £4,000 per year. Now, really, they're designed to help people quickly build up money for a
Yeah.
deposit to buy their first home,
Mm.
or you park that money and you access it again later in your life over the age of 60, where you can get that money back without penalty. You do have to be under the age of 40 to open one, which I assume most rugby league players would be. Although I know we've got some representatives of Rugby League Cares on the webinar as well who might be slightly over the age of 40, like I am.
And me.
Can I just say to those of you who are over the age of 40, if you have children aged between 18 and 40, you can get
Yeah.
them to open their own lifetime ISA, and we as parents can pay into it with them to help them with a deposit so they can get out from our house and go and get their own house. So, yes, it is a very interesting area. Again, it's something we're going to come back at and look at in our next quarterly series of webinars, because we'll be covering the topic of saving and investing. And of course, ISAs are going to play a key part in that. So watch this space. We'll cover it in more detail again. But yes, they are good, but really primarily aimed at first-time buyers.
Okay, cheers, Aid. That's it from me, and thank you ever
Okay.
so much indeed for all of this.
No problem. Well, thank you, Mark, for doing the questions in the background. Sounds like there are a lot of pension questions, which is, something that we're quite specialist at. So I'm sure Mark's answered those. Thank you for the ISA question as well. Thank you to Steve for the introduction, which he managed without coughing, because I know he's not feeling too well. And I do hope that this has been really useful for you. I hope also that if you get the opportunity if you want to ask any questions after today, and especially if you're watching a recording back, I'm here. I help rugby league players with money and finance. My email address has been on screen for quite a while now. So note it down, send me an email. I am more than happy to answer any questions anytime to the best of my abilities. But other than that, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I hope it's been useful. I hope I've stretched the boundaries of your understanding of things to do with finances. And I hope you have the rest of a good evening. I look forward to seeing you again in the next quarter. Take care. Bye for now.